Hey everybody, welcome to Screw the Stock Market, where we talk about financial freedom, time freedom, and taking control of our lives. And we do this primarily by investing not in the stock market. Screw that. We do it by investing in alternative assets. And today we have a very special guest, Scott Sweitzer. He is an estate planning attorney based in the DC area, and he's going to talk about how real estate investors and other investors should be aware of estate planning. Aziz, what'd you think of the show?
I thought it was an awesome show. We got a really in-depth viewpoint in terms of how trusts work, what they are, the advantages to having them, who should be looking at developing a trust, and just various steps and tricks of the trade regarding that whole process. He even started getting into some of the tax benefits, though that's going to be expanded upon on another episode. But it was kind of interesting to know that there are certain things you can do with a trust that you had no clue were possible before, besides just being able to pass things on to your beneficiaries. So it's definitely a good episode.
Yeah, I hope you guys get a lot of value from it. I mean, for me, I'll say the examples that he gave at the very beginning, where he literally tells stories of how families can be either set up to win or set up to be torn apart. It's really a big deal, and it's something that I think all of us, no matter how wealthy or how poor we are, need to be considering because it can affect us. And so hope you get a lot from it and enjoy the show. Last call to action. I want to encourage you guys all to please follow us on Instagram at Screw the Stock Market Show. We'll be posting more clips and other types of content on there to add value even more. So enjoy. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Screw the Stock Market. Today we're talking to Scott Sweitzer. He'll be talking to us about estate planning and how it relates to real estate investing and other types of investing. So, Scott, we're so happy to have you on the show today.
Gentlemen, I'm happy to be here. It's a Friday afternoon. It's lovely. It's autumn, and it's a good time to be talking about this kind of stuff. So I, just as backdrop here, I have been in the real estate title business for over 10 years. I own a real estate title company, Prime Settlement, and I also am a new real estate investor. So more about that later. But while I've been in the title industry, I really got seriously into the estate planning business about 5 years ago. And what prompted that was the death of my grandparents on both sides of the family. We really had kind of examples of excellent estate planning and what happens when you have a lack of planning. So on my mother's side, my grandparents, they met with their estate planning attorney. They set up what's called the Irrevocable Trust. And they brought my mom and her brother into the attorney's office. They talked about it, they collaborated, and they really understood everything. And then when my grandparents passed away, my mom and her brother went into that same attorney's office, and they were able to administer the trust, and everything was really taken care of within 3 to 4 months. Everything was easy, no court process, no what's called probate. And it was such a collaborative process that it actually brought that side of the family together closer than they had, because they were kind of working together towards a common goal during a period where they were also grieving and kind of emotionally open. On the other side of the family, I had relatives who kind of had the opposite experience. And maybe it was because the older generation didn't have as much in the way of assets. Their mindset was, well, since we don't have much, we'll just let the kids figure it out once we pass away. So they certainly didn't create a trust. They really didn't do any kind of estate planning. They didn't even have a will. So when they did pass away, basically what happened was the kids started fighting. So the family had to go through, their estate had to go through what's called a probate process proceeding. And each potential beneficiary hired their own attorney. And the whole process took about 2 to 3 years to administer. And the cost of probate, the cost of the legal fees and the court fees, ended up being about the same as the cost of actually the value of the estate. So nobody really got anything. And there are still people on that side of the family who aren't talking to each other to this day. So that's the part that I think was really kind of a tragedy, is this family had been close, and had their parents known that had they just taken some time to get their affairs organized, they could have prevented that from happening. So I saw that, and I realized that I see a lot of people going back and forth, buying and selling property, going through life changes, and I could really make an impact and opening my firm and adding that piece together. So that's really what inspired me to get involved with my planning and so forth. And so I focus on trust-based planning. I do foundational planning in general. There are some people actually who don't need a trust. There are some people who don't have enough assets so that a will-based plan is actually totally fine for them. But I typically focus on trust-based planning, and I focused on creating relationships with people. So it's not just a transaction; it's a relationship that you would have with a good financial planner. You have some communication over a period of time. And you make sure that as your lifestyle changes, as your financial situation changes, or as the law changes, you update your plan. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. Estate planning. So
Very interesting. Okay, that's kind of a shocking story. I mean, that almost makes me think that people who have less probably have more need to do this.
right, because often in that case, their kids really, that extra $50,000 or $100,000 would make a big difference to them in their lifestyle. You know what I mean? So it really would have. It is important.
Yeah, that's actually surprising because my mindset has always been the opposite. It's usually those types of issues arise more in wealthier families because they've got more to fight over. Yeah, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, if it's a family that doesn't have much wealth to begin with, every little bit counts. So people are going to fight even more viciously over things.
Right.
That's crazy that they lost the entire value of what they would have inherited just fighting over it.
Yeah, I mean, it costs money to hire attorneys and go to court. You know what I mean? And that's really the probate process. I think a lot of people don't realize what the probate process is really there. It's there to pick up the pieces when you pass away. It's really it's open for your creditors. It's for your creditors to be able to come in and make a claim against your estate and get paid. And that could be anything like from your mortgage company to your credit cards or anybody else. And it's part of the code. Each state and the District of Columbia requires that. But if you create what's called a revocable living trust, it's an agreement that survives your death. And so if it's funded properly, meaning if assets are titled into it correctly, your family doesn't have to go through probate in order to inherit things. And that's really, for most people, that's really the golden chalice for a foundational estate plan.
Now, how does that vary and differ from an irrevocable trust?
So an irrevocable trust has its own tax ID. It is something, there are tons of different kinds of irrevocable trusts. And they are used for, we'll talk about those a little bit later, but they are used for a variety of purposes. They can be used, there are Medicaid asset protection trusts that can be used for people who may have disabilities, maybe going to nursing homes. There are special needs trusts for people who have kids or grandkids that have special needs that want to maintain federal benefits, but also who will inherit. There are a variety of different irrevocable trusts that are good for estate planning purposes or estate tax avoidance purposes, I should say, and also asset protection purposes. So if you are in a high risk profession, like being a real estate developer, for example, or owning a bunch of franchises, or a real estate investor with a bunch of different properties, and your risk of being sued, somewhere along the line, it may make sense to put some of your wealth in irrevocable trust. The revocable living trust is much more straightforward than those trusts, and it's part of what I consider foundational planning. And the nice thing is that banks, investment institutions, even the county clerk's office, they typically understand how the revocable living trust works, and you're not going to have it's not going to be as expensive to put those into place. It's your get out of probate trust. That's the main goal for
That's the revocable trust.
Correct. Yep. It's keeping your family out of probate and providing a structure to your estate plan.
Okay.
Very interesting. Okay. So even more basic than revocable, just what is a trust? Because I have a little bit of trouble understanding it aside from just, in my mind, it's a company, it's an LLC, but I don't understand what the difference is between a trust and an LLC.
It's similar. The LLC, if you look back at the law and so forth, the LLC is an outgrowth of a corporation. And those type of entities are, they're structured to make profit. They're structured for people working together and to form a business to limit their liability. So ongoing companies and so forth, commerce and trade. The trust is really, it's set up for personal wealth, holding personal assets and so forth. And so they can actually perform some of the same functions. There was legislation out, I think it was last year, that was going to make it very difficult if it was passed, never was, for trusts to exist. And a lot of the estate planning community was really up in arms and they weren't sure what to do. One of their solutions were to use LLCs in place of trust for estate planning purposes. So the two aren't that different, but trusts really they're for personal use and holding personal assets and so forth and conveying them. A trust is really an agreement. It's an agreement between you as the grantor. You you're creating this trust, you're the grantor, you're putting assets into it. And when you're alive, you have three roles. You're the grantor, because you're creating it, you're putting things into it. You're the trustee, because you actually have control of those assets. You act as the trustee. And then you are also the beneficiary, because during your lifetime, you are also benefiting from everything in the trust. So really, it's just this agreement, it's the structure. And during your lifetime, it doesn't change the way that your assets are managed at all. It's only upon your death that the assets stay in the trust, but you have successor trustees that then step up and step into your shoes, and they actually administer the trust. They have the power to control the assets. You have beneficiaries designated. So their job then is to step in and distribute the assets into in the trust out to the beneficiaries. So that's why the trust, why it survives your death, and that's why if Creative's been funded properly, it can help your family avoid probate as well.
Very interesting. Okay, so now we have trusts and the very basic level. So, and then we've talked about revocable versus irrevocable. Let's start with a typical family that's just kind of getting by, and let's talk about what are the, okay, that first question is, who needs a trust, right? Like, or what are the first things that we need to do when we sit down, when you sit down with a client? What are the questions you ask? What are the things that?
Well, I mean, I think a good question is, who does estate planning apply to, just in general? Like, who should be thinking about estate planning at all? Is it just everyone? And my response would be anyone of the age 18 or over, because if you're a minor, you don't have to worry about estate planning because your parents or guardians are in control of your decisions and so forth. So anyone age 18 or over who either wants to make sure that if they're incapacitated, that they choose the people that are going to take care of them, that are going to manage their financial or medical care, who wants to make sure that it's them, not the court, deciding who gets to step in if they're incapacitated, or somebody who cares about what happens to the world once they pass away. They care about their community. They care about the people who are closest to them, and want to make sure that that they have a legacy, that the things that they own, the ideas and the values that they hold are passed on and taken care of in an orderly way. So it's most people. There are some people out there who I've met who said, listen, I'm not married, I don't have kids. I don't really care what happens after I die. I just don't care. You know what I mean? So literally, let it just happen. If that's really, truly is your mindset, then don't worry about estate planning. I still think having powers of attorney would make sense, because most people, want to make sure that someone is taking care of their affairs while they're, in a coma or in an accident or something. But beyond that, you just have to really care about the world around you and want to have some say in what happens. So that's the way I
low
look.
bar.
Yeah, it's a pretty low bar. I think a lot of people are afraid of estate planning. It's thinking about death. They don't want to. That's not a pleasant topic. But I find it really empowering for people once they take the effort and think through things, and we come up with a plan and everything. I think it really allows them to prioritize, and this is actually a sense of freedom and clarity that they can get. And if they have kids, if they have minor kids, they really feel relieved, because now they have a plan in place for who's going to take care of their kids and how their kids, tutors can be paid for and so forth. And especially in my practice, we also have what I call the priceless conversation. So it's actually we do an interview, either a video or an audio interview at the end of their planning, where clients will share either their values or their stories or their beliefs. And that will go on to their kids or to their families or their community. So they're sharing their spiritual legacy as well. So for most people, once they've actually done the estate planning, it's really a load off of their shoulders. There just seems to be a lot of procrastination, a lot of fear in that space. And then I think people, especially in the DC area, that are coming from different countries, where the state might make those choices for you. So they truly don't understand what estate planning is at all. Like they truly need to understand the fact that, what happens if you die without a will, for example. Your estate goes through what's called intestate succession. So each state has a different diagram that explains where your assets will go if you die without a will in place. You know what I mean? So that's why you just want to have a will, because the will is going to go through court, but you're at least telling the judge who gets what, who gets your assets and so forth.
Now, is there situations where a will is better than a trust, or is the trust always going to be a much better option than a will?
I would say, so for example, I believe, and don't quote me, I think in DC, the threshold is $60,000. If you have less than $60,000 in your possession, and that includes real estate, there's an expedited probate process that's pretty easy and fast. So in that situation, I think it might make more sense for you just to have a will as opposed to a trust. It'll go through the probate process, but it's cheap and it's fast, and it might be easy enough for your family to take care of that. Creating a trust and the cost involved with hiring an attorney to create it might just be too much in that situation. But for anybody who owns real estate, you're going to probably be worth more than $60,000 relatively quickly. So for those people, it makes more sense to have a trust.
Business owners as well, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely, because your business is something that will go through probate also. We can talk about that later, but I mean, the business owners, that's business succession planning is a whole other topic as well. And really, like, I work with attorneys, and we will take a client through their estate planning. We'll also go through their business succession plan, because the two usually are closely related.
Now, what are the normal average? I know it varies from place to place and state to state, but how expensive is it usually to create and maintain a trust?
I would say creating, it's going to depend if your attorney bills by the hour, if there's flat fees. It can be anywhere probably from like $3,000 to $6,000 to create a trust. What you should be focusing on is you shouldn't just create a trust in isolation. There are a whole other set of documents that you're going to create along with the trust to get your foundational estate plan in place so that things work together and they play well together. So I'd be happy to chat with people one-on-one to kind of talk about what that actually entails. But I would also say I wouldn't do, it's important not to look at a estate plan as just a set of documents, because it really is meeting with somebody who will be your counselor, who's really going to help you work through those conflicts and those thoughts and ideas in your mind. I meet with a lot of couples, for example, who have wanted to get their estate planning done, but they've been at odds about how to actually go about it. For example, I've had an LGBT couple where one of them is about 15 years older than the other one. He had a lot more assets. He was retired and so forth. He had a very handsome younger man that he had married, and he wanted to provide for, make sure his husband was provided for after he passed away. But he also wanted to make sure that his family, his nieces and nephews and family, inherited a substantial amount of money, and they were in conflict. They were fighting about that. They couldn't come up with a solution for how to make both of those things happen at the same time. That was really fun for me to be able to meet with them and come up with a creative solution that made both of them happy and solve that. And they actually sent me flowers afterwards, which was really sweet, I thought. So that's part of it. Really is, it's not just a set of documents. It's a creative solution to work through kind of an important life problem, and it's a relationship. It's a relationship with somebody or with a firm who's going to be able to make sure that your plan makes sense as time goes by.
Love that example. That's really challenging, right? Because it's understandable from every side, right? And those details matter, and to be able to sit with you and have guidance to navigate that, have that kind of mediation and coaching to be able to have those difficult conversations. I can see how important that would be.
It is, a lot of that's like you really are. It's like a lot of active listening and so forth, and a lot of drawing people out. But it's funny. Sometimes it's the toughest clients. It's maybe the spouse who's really kind of prickly in their initial meeting and so forth. That when we get to the third meeting, we have the crisis conversation, the interview about the kids. I have to bring cleaning soda because they'll start crying and so forth and everything. And actually, sometimes we become friends after that, because there's not a lot of people perhaps that couple has shared that much with. You know what I mean? I love those interviews because I learn about people's parenting philosophies. I learn about their spiritual beliefs. I learn about their history, immigrants coming from different countries and having to deal with hardship or incredible successes. So I really feel like that's edifying, and I have gratitude for kind of getting that insight from their stories as well.
Is there usually like a minimum amount of assets you should have before you start considering a trust, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, I think it depends on what state you're in. In DC, their threshold's about $60,000. But I think that's kind of the threshold. What I would say, if you have real estate, your real estate's pretty much always going to pass through probate, especially in the DMV area. I mean, you really can't get any property to live in that's less than $60,000. So then it becomes an issue of budgeting for yourself. I have people that will come to me who want a trust, who are really sold on the idea of a trust, but they just can't afford it. So we'll do a will-based plan, and I'm always surprised they'll put a pin in the calendar for a year later and actually come back and upgrade to a trust-based plan and actually save up their money to do that. So you can do it in stages.
And just a quick definition for those of our listeners who are outside the tri-state area that the three of us are located in. DMV stands for DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. There's a few of them. There's a few folks outside. So, okay, so this is kind of the basic game plan. Now let's talk a little bit about real estate. So if I have my house, my own personal residence under my name and my wife's name, well, let's see what else can we talk about. So I feel like I'm out of questions, Scott. Like you're covering everything so well.
Well, I've got some.
Oh, please.
Okay.
Please.
So in regards to the tax benefits of a trust, could you discuss some of that, particularly in terms of, if you're an investor or whatever, what are some tax benefits you can get out of a trust?
Well, first of all, the Revocable Living Trust, because it's a pass-through entity, doesn't change taxes at all. So you don't think about it in terms of tax benefits at all. That's a separate subject. That's like an add-on. You know what I mean? You can, for example, so obviously as real estate investors, we know that one of the benefits of investing in real estate is that you get a lot of tax write-offs for any expenses and losses. You get depreciation that comes in, regardless of whether or not the property actually falls apart. And then you hopefully get long-term capital gains treatment if you hold the property for a certain period of time. You get the benefit of 1031 exchanges when you sell the property and then you exchange it with a similar type of property. So all those are amazing things. And I think you just have to make sure that your estate planning isn't getting in the way of any of that. So the Revocable Living Trust isn't going to give you any extra tax benefits, but it's not going to take anything away either.
Okay.
There are things. So, for example, we can talk about estate planning for people who have estate tax issues. Right now, the threshold for federal estate tax issues is about $12 million for an individual person. And actually, if you're married, you can double that and get about $24 million in terms of exemption. So that's a pretty high bar. Nevertheless, I've got clients who have more than 12 or $22 million in their estate tax, their estate. So they have federal estate tax issues. And it's important to note that each state, not all of them, but for example, Maryland and DC, they have their own estate tax. So in DC, threshold for estate tax in DC is $4 million. And that includes that I guess is relevant either if you're single or if you're married. So a married couple in DC, if their estate, that includes their real estate, cash assets, business, life insurance policies, retirement accounts, if that is $4 million or over, and that's more common than you would imagine, their estate will be taxed unless there is something that is proactively done to get that money out of their estate. And so that's actually where you look at more kind of advanced estate planning. Some tools to minimize or estate planning with estate taxes would include LLCs, irrevocable trusts, or you can actually purchase certain types of life insurance policy that won't get the money out of the estate, but it will actually compensate your heirs so that it will pay the estate tax for them. There's a variety of things you can do for estate taxes. There's also some things you can do in terms of, I think you guys mentioned before, that some of your audience may be foreigners, so non-US residents, non-US citizens who are looking to invest in US investment properties. There are things you can do to get around estate taxes there. One of the differences is we talk about those thresholds, the exclusions. If you are a foreigner, you only get $60,000 that's exempt from estate tax. So that's a huge difference, and that's a huge challenge for people who are investing in real estate here from abroad. And I'm not an expert in this area, but I did a little bit of research, and one of the main ways you can get around that is purchasing your property in a foreign corporation that has its headquarters outside of the US. So if you guys want more information about that, I'm happy to chat with an attorney who's an expert in that area. But so trusts have a role in that kind of tax situation as well.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Very interesting. Okay.
Now, can you go back to where you discussed about utilizing a life insurance policy as a way of minimizing your estate tax?
Sure. And I don't sell life insurance, so I'm not going to go into the details about that. But basically, you can buy term life insurance that's relatively inexpensive. And but you basically buy very large policies on yourself. And the money that you use, there's certain tax benefits and so forth, the money that you use to buy the insurance and so forth is deductible from your income. And the insurance itself, once it's received by your heirs, your beneficiaries, I believe is usually received tax-free. So there's some tax benefits there. You would then calculate the amount of estate tax that you anticipate your estate, your family having to pay. And let's say it's $5 million. So you would buy policies that were worth about $5 million, it's approximately $5 million, so that when you pass away, that money that is paid out towards your heirs. And so that it basically compensates them for the cost of the taxes. So you're not actually avoiding the taxes. You're not moving the money out of your estate, but you're making sure that you're not really suffering a big loss other than the actual cost of the life insurance policy. And that can be done. There's more elaborate ways of doing that with charitable trusts. We've heard charitable remainder trusts. Those are popular because there are ways for people who own highly appreciated assets like real estate or businesses, private businesses. You can put them in the charitable trust, and that eliminates any capital gains tax. The corpus, the property itself, actually goes to the charity of your choice, but the income for a certain period of time then goes to your heirs or to your family and so forth after you pass away. So there are kind of creative ways of dealing with highly appreciated assets, which is relevant to the real estate investor community. You know.
Can you explain the charitable trust aspect again? That's
I'll do
sounds
my
interesting,
best.
but I wasn't clear on it.
There are a bunch of different kinds of charitable trusts, different structures, but basically you set them up during your lifetime. You put highly appreciated assets in these trusts, like real estate that has, I believe it's is it a low basis and then it's appreciated a lot over time. I think that's right. So you put those assets into the trust, and it's set up in a way that it will then basically, it's now being held in trust. Let's say that you are going to, myself, I'm an opera fan, so I volunteered for the Washington National Opera for several years, and let's say I decide to donate, my primary residence when I'm older to the opera. I've had it for 40 years, something it's appreciated a lot. I could put that in a charitable trust, and the opera would be the beneficiary. So once I pass away, the opera would get let's say it's a $4 million house in this trust. I would get then a stream of income for a certain number of years while it's in the trust, and that income would come to me. And by doing it that way, you have to fund it with life insurance policies. So it's a little complicated. You buy the policies, those actually fund the trust and the income stream. I get the income, the opera gets the property, and no one pays any capital gains tax. So that's one example.
So I'm still not clear on how you're generating the income.
The income gets generated through life insurance policies.
Okay.
You have to through life insurance policies, but I'll explain that to you later on. I'm happy to follow up. It's a bit of a complicated procedure, and it just takes a little bit more time to explain in depth. I think an example is always good. I don't have an anecdote on me right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something I think myself and our listeners, I think, would definitely be interested in.
Yeah, if you're charitably minded, there are a lot of different varieties of that trust, and it can be a good way to go. Because that's one of the questions is, what do you do as a real estate investor as you're getting on in age? Because you have to deal with business succession planning yourself. Because if you're a professional real estate investor, guess what? You're a business owner. And you got to think about things about who's going to be in charge of property management and asset management if you aren't able to do it. What will the tax implications of selling your properties? Is there a way to delay or minimize taxes? And do you have a business partner or a member of your family who would like to take over your investment business? If yes, that's great. You can groom them and so forth. But if not, would you benefit from having an option to transition from being an active real estate investor to a passive real estate investor? There are ways that you guys know this better than me, but like commercial real estate is easier to manage, maybe turnkey properties. You can avoid capital gains by leaving properties to your heirs, if you die with them and so forth. And there are also different parts of the tax code that allow you to transition from actively managed real estate to real estate investment trusts. Two that come to mind are the Delaware Statutory Trust and the Deferred Sales Trust. I won't speak more to those, but there are techniques you guys maybe have heard about before that allow you to go from active to passive. So
interesting. You're making me reevaluate all of those charities and giveaways that a lot of the ultra wealthy are doing right now, like the Gates Foundation and Warren Buffett and all that. It doesn't seem so charitable right now.
Well, I mean, I I think it can be charitable. It can be good for a good cause.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'd be kidding yourself if most of the people aren't being strategic, and if there aren't tax benefits doing that, there really are, and that's where you really, when I'm doing more advanced estate planning, if I'm doing things that involve tax planning, that's when I bring in like a tax lawyer, a CPA, or someone who's like a specialist in asset protection, and then the team of us really gets together and works in that, because it takes a team at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of like a family office.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Very interesting. No, I think, I definitely always had that feeling, right, with the charitable thing. I just felt like there was something I'm missing because, it's a tax write-off even for us common people, right? But
Right.
it's not at a point where I feel like by giving a charitable contribution, it's still more of a charitable act for me. I don't feel like the write-off is worth it in the sense, right? I'm
Right.
giving because I want to. But what you're saying is there's a way to make it maybe even,
Yes.
are you getting
Yeah.
more than what you give, or getting
Generating an income.
Yeah. If you're in a place where you're going to have estate tax issues and you have serious capital gain issues, yes, there are ways to structure things to benefit charities of your choice that actually, really clean up a lot of the taxes and really make things easier for yourself, give you the income you need in retirement, and also give a bunch of money to your heirs and whoever you decide to. So it's a nice win-win. People really love it, and I recommend it.
Now, how wealthy do you have to be to make a charitable trust worthwhile?
I mean, I would say you probably at least want to have maybe like, you're getting towards $10 million, $5-10 million. I wouldn't consider it unless you had at least 5, In DC, then at least you have a situation where right now the limit is $4 million. You want to be above that. But think about from this perspective, a lot of real estate investors, if they start accumulating properties when they're young and they end up with a dozen of them, getting to $4 million is not difficult. It really isn't.
Yeah, and depending also on the market or where you're located. I mean, look at the property values in our area. I mean, they have beyond skyrocketed.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
It's a waiting game. It's about time. Yeah.
What else would I say? Some of my clients come to me and, let's say they are well off. I had one recently who came to me who he owns a CPA firm, among other things, probably worth about $25 million. And he has estate tax issues. So part of the solution is putting a plan in place for that. But he also got to a place where he was struggling with the money to leave to his sons. And he wanted to leave at least, $4 million to each son. And then he sort of said, I'd like to leave, more of them as long as they practice, uphold a good Jewish life and so forth, because they are Jewish. And I'd say, okay, would you like to pick a trustee who's going to, monitor their activity and then give them some sort of, criteria and so forth? And he balked at that idea. He didn't like the idea of empowering somebody to kind of make that judgment against the sons and so forth. So he was struggling. And so there's a concept out there, and this applies to a lot of times people who are wealthy enough that they feel uncomfortable just leaving that money to their kids. And maybe they don't just want to give it away to charity. But the idea is that some practitioners call it entrusted planning. But the idea is that rather than just saving your money up, dividing it and dumping it to the next generation, that you actually bring your family and family writ large, family, friends, whoever is most important to you, and you actually kind of create a family motto, creed, business model, and begin kind of like working on the charitable works or working on building the business or whatever it is while you're still alive, so that you kind of do your estate planning in reverse, as opposed to just gifting things to people after you pass away. You start that process much earlier, and you get the whole family working together and collaborating, so that when you die, all the activities still happen. Whether it's going to be a foundation that you create, whether it's going to be, building a family business, whatever it is, raising the next generation, you front load that work and start doing it while you're still alive. And that way you don't have to feel uncomfortable leaving it to your family because they're already involved in the process beforehand.
Love that. That sounds, I mean, I've had clients do that in the past, just as real, there's a friend who he retired from his career after a long time, and he had his primary residence, which was the store of most of his wealth. And he said, hey, sell it and give it to my kids. Like they're in charge. This is their living inheritance, and it's done,
Yeah,
And part of that was for him to be able to enjoy them enjoying the money, right? To position them in a better place.
exactly.
But I like that image.
Yeah, and it can take, you have to have a little more confidence in your family, now, and you have to put it, depending on what your goals are, you might have to front load that work, because you're gonna have to communicate with people and really, collaborate together while you're still here. But I think for people who have that time and want to put the effort in, that can be a great way to move things forward, and it gives your family a real sense of identity.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, Scott, can I ask you again before we end, where are you licensed?
I'm licensed in DC, Virginia, and Maryland.
Okay, beautiful. All over the DC.
Both the settlement company and for legal as well. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Are there any other topics that you'd like to share with our audience before we end our call today?
Well, a couple of things here, just kind of like bits and pieces. Going back to the importance of trust-based planning and avoiding probate. I think it's important for real estate investors to know that that's particularly important for them. If you own properties in multiple jurisdictions, let's say in the DMV of DC, Maryland, Virginia, or if you're investing across the US, kind of diversify your portfolio. If you die without having those properties funded into a trust, your estate, your family will have to open up separate probate proceedings in each state where you own property. And that means hiring separate attorneys, having separate ongoing processes. So that's super expensive, and it's very stressful, and takes a lot of time for your kids or whoever your personal representative is. So that's, I think, another reason why real estate investors who have a lot of different properties should focus in on that kind of planning. And a third is, I think people don't realize this, that actually when you get to the point where your properties are held in LLCs, I have a client of mine who's worth about $50 million, and I took a look at his personal financial statement. I thought, oh my God, this is gonna be a nightmare to try to do the funding for this. But his properties were all owned by LLCs or a couple of holding companies, and you actually don't have to do any deed transfers whatsoever in that case. If your company is held by an LLC, all you have to do is assign your membership interest from your individual capacity into yourself as the trustee of your trust. It's a private document. You just execute it and stick it with your estate plan, and voila, your business properties or your business itself now passes outside of probate. So there's actually some upside when you get to that level of organization. So I think it's important that people realize that. Well, I know as an investor, it's always LLC versus holding your own name, and there's reasons for both of them and so forth. But if you get to a certain point, that can be helpful.
That makes it easy. Okay, that's great. Now that just raised a question for me is, what about for people who have invested in syndications? So I signed my private placement memorandum and I invested with Alex on an apartment building, but I signed as an individual. Am I then able to go and create a trust?
You can create a trust. I would have to say you'd have to look at the documents in the syndication to see if it's possible to do a transfer into the name of the trust. I would think that it should be, but I think talk to the attorney who actually did the syndication and see what the mechanism is. There's probably a mechanism for gifting shares of the syndication, but I'm guessing there's a mechanism for transferring it from your personal name to your revocable living trust as well. But that's a common occurrence, and it's something you should definitely think about.
Beautiful. Okay.
Anyone who's trying to create a syndication, just put that little box in the corner and ask your attorney or a syndication attorney how we structure things that way.
One last question. I think you touched on it earlier. How are creditors treated within the context of a trust? So let's say I was to pass away and I had some debts, but I had a trust in place, and now my heirs now are taking over my trust. Do they also now accumulate my debts, or do the creditors come after the trust directly, take out their share first, and whatever is left over goes to the beneficiaries? How does that work?
Well, it's a bit of a loaded question, but I'm going to take it at face value, and that is, we're talking about the revocable living trust. Yeah. Really, what would your successor trustee, their job would be to go through the list of creditors like the mortgage company and credit card payments. And they would typically, it would be their duty then to pay those in an orderly fashion and so forth. Yeah. so that the people, and because the creditors wouldn't have a right to come after the heirs unless there be like a fraudulent conveyance or something like that. That does open up the door to a whole other conversation about asset protection specifically, and how that's going to be important to real estate investors. But that's again not using a local living trust. That's using LLCs. That's making sure you have homeowners insurance, making sure you have an umbrella policy over your properties, making sure that your properties aren't held free and clear, because that actually can be a target for creditors. Having holding companies, having domestic or foreign asset protection trusts. But I think that's a topic for another time, another podcast conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a great follow-up conversation to have.
Right, of course.
One thing else that you just mentioned made my ears perk up. So you're saying that it's a risk to hold a property free and clear.
If you're looking at asset protection, this is kind of, I didn't come up with this idea. This is something that was interesting for me too. The way to think about it also is so you're looking at inside liability and also outside liability. So inside liability, if you own a rental property, for example, would be if one of your tenants got injured and they assert that it's because of some kind of negligence in your property. The liability is like the assets within the property then. The danger is that that kind of a risk, that liability, that lawsuit that came out of something that happened in your rental property, then affects the rest of your wealth, right? They sue not just your LLC that owns the company, but they sue you personally, and that affects the rest of you. So you're trying to, by using LLCs and other devices, you're trying to kind of put blinkers or put boundaries around each of your assets so that if one of them blows up, it doesn't affect everything. The other is outside liability, and that is what happens if something to you in your personal life. What happens if you're driving down the road and you're drunk and you drive into somebody and you cause horrible damage or something? Let's use a better answer actually. So this is someone gave to me. So somebody is in their house. Let's say they're actually in a condo building. They're in a nice condo building. They're up in the 5th floor. They're in the bathtub. It's 11 p.m. They've had a couple of drinks, and suddenly their friend calls up and says, "There's this great party going on next door. Why don't you come join us?" And so they do. They leave the bathtub on, unfortunately. They leave the faucet on. So it spills over, causes a huge leakage and so forth, and it drains down and causes like $2 million worth of damage. Their homeowners insurance company denies the claim because of negligence, because the act was considered to be negligent. So they're on the hook for $2 million. They would have to pay that themselves out of their personal wealth. But if they had that wealth, for example, in a asset protection trust, the neighbors would have a much more difficult time collecting on that. So they'd be able to shield their wealth from either outside liability or inside liability. So asset protection is all about making it more difficult for creditors to get at your assets, whether they're in LLCs or someplace else.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
We want to be able to keep our money, right?
Yeah. we definitely need to have a follow-up conversation on that.
Sure, I mean,
a whole episode dedicated to asset protection.
I mean, it gets, and we could bring someone else on too. I know a gentleman who's an attorney who specializes he actually works on Cook Island Asset Protection Trust. The Cook Islands currently are considered probably the best best jurisdiction to have your asset protection trust. And has a history working in the Cook Islands for insurance companies and trust companies and so forth. So that's what he does. And you're talking a lot of money when you're creating these kind of trusts to make them for ongoing maintenance and so forth. But for some people, it's worth it.
Wow. Okay. Who would have ever thought the Cook Islands?
I know, right? How random is that?
There's these odd, strange locations that provide, really amazing protections and whatnot all over the world. Or kind of, I heard like Malta. Gibraltar was another area that a lot of people have been paying attention to recently for tax sheltering and other things like that, corporate tax sheltering and whatnot, which is
different places for different reasons. Where you would put your assets for corporate tax shelter is not the same place as you put for asset protection. So different jurisdictions have different values, different hotspots.
Right. It's interesting. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is. So, well, is that it, guys? Or is there anything else I can talk about? I really appreciate having the opportunity to be on your podcast. It's been great.
No, I mean, we're very thankful to have you on here. I mean, you've answered a lot of questions and you've also created more questions. So you open up.
That's always a good sign.
That's the way it should. That's the way it should be. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for being on here. And then, is there any way that our listeners can reach out to you if they have questions or they would like to seek some of your services?
Sure, absolutely. They can contact me. Let me just, most people probably are on Instagram, I would guess, right? So my profile on Instagram is STSWEITZ V9. So ST Sweitz V9, Scott Sweitzer. And you can also always, you can just find me at primeestateplanning.com. And you guys can feel free. What I'll do is I'll share some links and stuff with you guys when you post this too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
So
Scott, thank you so much.
no, appreciate it. Absolutely. If you guys have any follow-up questions, just let me know. Yeah, I'm excited about the real estate investing stuff too. I'm finally ready to go ahead and work with cash providers. So was that intimidating for both of you when you first started asking people, or not asking people money, that's the wrong way to put it, but when you first started to approach people with investment opportunities for your deals?
That's an important difference.
Yes.
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 It's the same thing, but yes, it's an
Well,
important
you
difference.
have to get in the mindset that and you have to believe, and you have to run your own numbers and so forth. You have to also be a fiduciary of their capital. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to just share, to hear more about your story at some point in time. Like that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'll say that I've had calls that felt like I was asking for money, and I've had calls that people were so thankful for this opportunity. I've been waiting for this. I've been wanting this.
Right.
And I never could before because I wasn't an accredited investor. And so
Right.
it's me picking up the phone and sharing this opportunity. But some people take it one way, some people take it the other way.
Yeah.
But I guess what's more important is how you look at it before you pick up that phone. Definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
And the reality is that most people want these types of opportunities. They dream about it. It's like, yeah, I want to be an investor. I want to get into this. They just don't know how. And, if somebody knows and can guide them through the process, I mean, they actually are happy for it.
Right. No.
Yeah.
And I got to think too, if you get really good at raising capital, you get to the point where actually the money is chasing you. And people are like, hey, when can I invest in your next deal? And that opens a lot of doors too.
Definitely.
Oh yeah.
So, well, looking forward to hear more about the fun that you guys start when you get to the place where you're actually ready to go live with it.
Well, you'll be on the list. You'll get a call from us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
Take care.
Enjoy the weekend.
You
care. You
too.
too. Bye.
Bye-bye.